I'm Tesh Patel from Hootsuite. I'll give you a bit of background first, but a little rattled. My colleague here just told me that people get rated. The speakers actually get rated right after the sessions. So that's not the best. About to go up here. So thanks, Ian. So I've been working for Hootsuite for almost 5 years, mostly in New York City, and then moved over to London about a year and a half ago. And before that, working in B2B tech space basically my entire career. And what we're going through today is kind of what we've developed over that time period at Hootsuite, because we do work with organizations from super immature in the social media space to incredibly sophisticated. And through that time, at first we went from advocates to describe why social media is important in the first place. You would think some big complex organizations would have a defined strategy of why they're doing it, but there still are lots that are just on Facebook, on Twitter, or LinkedIn just because they should or they have to, rather than what's the actual point of it. So we've worked with several customers, and then including our own selves across our social media channels to kind of develop how we can actually prove an ROI of what the purpose of social media is across channels. Everyone is finally on there, but now how can we be methodical? How can we prove that the X amount of money we're spending on Facebook ads or the X amount of money we're spending on softwares like Hootsuite is actually pushing the needle for us in terms of our business objectives as an organization? So that's what we'll present today. We'll do a Q&A at the end, and then I'm sure we'll follow up with this deck where there's other links for information and so forth. Okay, so defining, measuring, and proving ROI, it goes directly correlated with the social maturity of an organization. So you can see on this chart here, defining is kind of the first point. So what are we trying to actually achieve? What are the business objectives that we want as an organization, and how does social media actually impact those objectives? It's a loose correlation at first when you think about it. How does social media directly impact to, let's say, brand awareness or my rebrand or whatever it might be? But later on, we'll kind of outline the metrics that correlate with that. And then measurement. So being able to measure the different actions that happen across all the social media channels, you immediately think of likes, comments, shares, those types of things. We call those vanity metrics, which I'll talk about a bit later. But really, when you're looking at any content that you're pushing out, we're actually at a better place than we've ever been. Traditionally, it would be print and ads on a subway, but you're not actually getting any direct feedback from that. But now, since we have all of these digital assets and communication devices, by implementing web analytics and other things that we'll talk about, you can actually measure it way better than you ever were able to. And then proving is the final step. So when we are with a big, complex organization that is pretty mature, let's say, for example, Hootsuite, now we're putting in our business objectives. We define clear goals. Now we're measuring it, so we have our analytics set up in a system that we can actually consume that data in a meaningful way. And now we're proving it. So where do we start with proving it? So typically we'd go with benchmarking. So we did a campaign in 2018. Now that we have every measurement in place, how did we do in 2019? Or how do we do against a competitor? There's a lot of anonymized information you can get on your competitors in your space. And so that could leave for a good space to benchmark and kind of prove that what you're doing on social media is actually, you're increasing the definition of objectives that you've created. But there is a challenge, of course. So there's a big fragmented customer journey. So there's offline, online. There's things like meetups like this. There are direct calls. There's a lot of ways in which companies can touch a customer, which could get overwhelming. But really, it's pretty disjointed because there's not one single path. Ideally, you'd want to touch a customer in the right spot at the right time, in the right method. But since it's all a little fragmented, you might not be giving them the optimal customer journey that you want to give them. So we've kind of simplified it as much as we could. And if you look at the straight line there from awareness all the way down to expansion, we're taking the physical contacts that you can have with a person or an individual or the buyer or whoever the customer is. And then on the top, the digital approach to all of those. So starting from awareness, PR, print, word of mouth. Of course, that's the first stage of awareness. That's always been the case. But now with social media and digital, you can now create awareness through online ads, viral email, social, search, and so forth. So if we take a look, you can go back to your organizations after today, kind of map out where all of those touch points happen from awareness all the way over to expansion. And then later on, we'll talk about the metrics that you can prove through those social media channels and how they align to each of them. So I said we'll talk about vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are those things that companies typically will say, well, now we want to increase follower growth. We want to look at likes on a piece of content or shares. But those don't really mean anything. You can combine them all to contribute to an overall meaning of something. But those alone, it's not really giving you any specific feedback. Sure, you can say that a piece of content has a certain level of affinity or customer satisfaction or whatever it might be, based on the number of likes or loves or happy faces that it gets. But it's still not giving us any kind of adjustment of our content. You have to take that and combine it with all of these other metrics, as you saw in that earlier graph. And so the objective that we've come up, and we bring this up with every customer we possibly could work with Hootsuite, is understanding the top-line business objectives. So these are things that could come from your shareholder reports or anything that is clearly defined related to your mission as a company. What are those top objectives that each executive person within your organization is trying to achieve over the course of the year, 5 years, and so forth? Once you've clearly defined those objectives, then we'll start mapping out all of the different KPIs that we now have through digital channels to match those objectives. And we'll kind of go through this exercise so you guys get an idea of how you can take that back and then look at how can we actually benchmark and prove that internally within your organizations. So we'll start with some business goals. So here's an example of 3 different industries. We just chose telco, retail, and FinServe. And these business goals are really the top line, so I'll move it out of the way for a second, the top line for each of those. So if you're looking at telco, I have EE as my provider. So you're looking at subscriptions, so who's actually buying phone contracts. You're looking at purchases, you're looking at customer satisfaction, and then sponsorships perhaps. So those are the top business objectives. Those are the things that we're just going to try to unlock as we go further down the funnel using social media. For retail CPG, sales revenue, newsletter sign-up, sentiment, repeat purchasing, brand awareness, especially if you're releasing new products in new markets, brand awareness becomes very key, and those are things that we can measure through social. And then for something like financial services, sign-ups, downloads, so people downloading white papers and research, and then also event registration, so something like this. Every different industry has obviously some crossover with those business goals, but so it's important to make sure that you keep them super high level so that you're always contributing to that overarching goal. So we'll start building out this grid here. So looking at some business objectives in this case. In this case, we are talking about a financial services company. So some of theirs would be increasing awareness amongst investors. So making sure that this financial firm is top of mind in various investor circles that are dealing with certain products or certain industries and so forth. Growing interest from new investors. So you can see there's a little bit of a difference there. So increasing awareness is different from growing interest because growing interest shows intent. So there's actually some little next layer in terms of that. Building positive reputation amongst investors. So that's increasing affinity. Driving website traffic, so that could be something as simple as link clicks. Driving attendance to investor events, and then improving customer satisfaction. Now that we have those objectives clearly defined, now we need to have some targets or goals aligned with this. I'm sure a lot of you are doing this already, but just wanted to go to, after you have an objective, you do need to do something with that objective. Is it meet? Is it exceed? Is it increase? Is it whatever? So here's 3 that we've actually heard from real customers of ours. So we want to increase positive brand mentions next quarter by 15%. Seems pretty reasonable, but how do we actually measure that? And we'll get to that. 150 marketing qualified leads at 40 euros each this fiscal quarter. And then finally, recruit 3 new account executives by March at 200 euro per interview. So these are actually measurements that we then will align to some other business objectives. So again, there's just another example of some of those that you could potentially have. And then we'll put them in that second layer of the grid. So goals and targets. So increasing, in this case, increasing awareness amongst investors by X percent. Growing interest from new investors by B percent, and so forth. So make sure that you map that out. If you don't have any kind of realistic figures to use there, go back and do some benchmarking and see how you did previously in other campaigns. Look at competitive intel. There actually are a lot of free tools that you can use to look at how competitors did on, let's say, some content performance or download white papers, that sort of thing. But if you want to keep it as simple as increase, decrease, you don't necessarily have to do it by a percentage. Now, with social media, we basically are putting traditional Marcom's KPIs and putting it into this new funnel of methodology. So if you align the awareness all the way down to conversion, back to those business objectives, try to fit in where each of these kind of fit. So in this case, awareness, so number of times your brand is seen. That makes sense. So is it seen by display ads? Is it seen by having the Unbound logo right there? Is it seen by a Facebook ad? Is it seen by just putting out organic content on LinkedIn? There's different ways in which you can define that awareness. And then if we go down towards affinity, it's a number of times brand content is liked or audience growth. So this is actually tying back to your those vanity metrics I was talking about. But we can go even deeper on that, and I'll show you that in a couple slides. Consumption, so number of times the brand's actually interacted with. A good example of this is if Hootsuite puts out a video on YouTube, how many people actually watched the video at least 30 seconds and then wrote a comment. Those are metrics that you actually can get from that. So that's actually a consumption in our minds. Conversations, so the number of times the brand is discussed. This doesn't have to be discussions on comments on, let's say, a Facebook post, but it could be comments that are happening outside of your own channels. So you can use different social listening tools to look at, what are people talking about of Hootsuite in certain markets, on blogs, on Reddit, and so forth. So there's some other types of conversation that's happening. Intent, so this is actually someone making another action. So in this case, number of online store visits or link clicks. So someone's consuming some piece of content and then doing some action. And then finally, conversion. This could vary across every industry. So if we go back to that financial services example, it's someone actually downloading a white paper or maybe clicking a button to call someone or talk to someone. Or it could be a purchase. It could be someone putting a piece of or a pair of shoes in a shopping cart. So those are the actual end-to-end conversions that we want to track. Now, going back to that grid, from your company's business goals, we move back. We're going to align those pieces of the marketing funnel to the different business objectives that you have. A lot of these, again, could have overlap. There could also be several other objectives that you have as an organization. But affinity in this case, let's say it's building a positive reputation. That is affinity. But that affinity could also, in that case, be a repeat customer. So someone that's coming back and forth to your landing page or your site. So it could there's not one defined place where you put all of these. But as an example, it's good to map out which of these buckets is it ticking. So now that we have that funnel, let's go and put some actual KPI, some metrics to each of those buckets. So awareness. If you're looking at something like Facebook and Twitter, it gives you reach, right? Reach and impressions, no matter what. You'll be able to get that whether it's organic content or if you're actually paying for it. But you could also look at things in terms of awareness. It could be share of voice. So if people are talking about you, people are aware of your brand or your company. So you can take a look at what's happening outside of your own channels, just going back to that social listening concept I was talking about earlier. And then you can tie all of that back to awareness. Then we can go in down to affinity. So this could be a vanity metric like likes or follower growth, retweets, favorites. But it could also mean, who actually, maybe someone that's looking at your YouTube channel that's a subscriber, they also subscribe to another channel, or they sign up to a newsletter, or they go another step down to being kind of really into your brand or your company. So that would be the affinity side. Consumption is actually being able to consume content. So in this case, I wrote video views, page views. If you pay for content, of course, you're getting a lot more data from those social media channels. So for a Facebook advertisement, they actually will give you a lot about video views. So it'll say how many people actually clicked to unfollow your brand because they were impressed on a video. How many autoplays did you have? How many people watched it? 3, 5, 15, 30, completion. So it gives you all of those different stats. And if consumption to you means a video view, that's fine. But maybe it means someone that actually completed the video, and that's more of a realistic stat that you want to look at. So take a look at that when you define how are you actually measuring consumption. And it could be a bucket of all of those things. Maybe consumption is people that watched a full video, and it's every 1,000 person that did that. And that could count as one consumption towards your marketing bucket. Conversation, I think that's pretty clear. It's people that are talking, sharing, commenting, mentioning your brand. Intent is the link clicks, brand visits, so an actual intent to go further to find more information. And then finally, the conversions that I talked about. Something like mobile app installs, buying something, downloading something, those actual metric conversions. So now we've put the primary social marcoms metrics down in the grid. They're all still tracked correctly. I'll go back to this middle one here, build a positive reputation amongst investors, improving NPS, that goes to affinity, and that goes to views, mentions, and comments. As an example on that, if people are commenting on a piece of content that's aimed to increase affinity, you can take, let's say, 50 happy faces that happen on Facebook and combine that as to one action of affinity and combine that with other areas in which you're measuring that. So you're not just married and counting each of those individual vanity metrics. And then we need to prioritize, of course. So getting started with this exercise, we actually did this exercise with a major car brand in Europe. They made this grid about 30 deep, but that's just too much to start with, of course. So what we've done is add a prioritization. Let's think about the top 3 to 5 really strong areas that we have accurate measurement methods in place, like web analytics. All those web analytics are hooked into data visualization or business intelligence tools, or they're hooked into CRM systems and things that are improving their customer. So we kind of challenged their executive board to come up with, what are the things that you feel confident that we can impact through social media? We came back with them and said, we're confident that we can help you measure these things, and we'll go from there. So we started with 3 major themes, and then as we go on, you can spread out to more channels, to more metrics, to more business objectives, obviously. And then we had benchmarking. These metrics that you're getting back, they don't mean anything unless you're actually benchmarking to prove success. So what we can do is looking in internal benchmarking, so looking at previous activity, projecting goals based on those results. Competitors, this car brand obviously had a lot of competitors specifically in their space, specifically in Europe. So they were able to look at, how did this similar car type perform in this country based on their content strategy. And then we can benchmark against that. That was a pretty easy one for us to do. And then finally, campaign benchmarking. If you have a similar campaign, let's say every year, so let's take, for example, Unbound London. Unbound London can maybe look at their attendance and their social media strategy surrounding that from last year, and now compare it to this year. So looking at historical, specific campaign benchmarking, or maybe they want to combine and look at how did London perform with this social strategy versus Unbound Miami with this social strategy, and so forth. And then what does that look like in practice? We kind of went over this already. Here's actually which is some real numbers here. So increasing monthly engagement by 50%, increase awareness to customers, so being able to create awareness against the total addressable market, 10% increase in conversion rate, and then 10% increase in conversions by way of signups. So it's building this grid and then making sure that you're married to this every time that you're putting out content to social media. You think about, am I putting out content that's leading towards one of these objectives? Yes or no? Is that content going to be accurately measured? Otherwise, what's the point of it? Is it just out there to do just to have? So you want to make sure that every kind of lever is in place, that you're accurately measuring. That way, if you do achieve these targets or don't, you're very confident that you can find out why. Like maybe this piece of content didn't work, maybe this ad buying strategy didn't work as much, or maybe you did achieve those targets, and then you can make sure that you ensure that you do that the following year or the following campaign. So there's some considerations to make. So again, think about the priorities of the business. What are the major drivers that you want to achieve? how are you going to achieve it? Set those goals into, do you want to exceed by a certain percent? But then also make sure there's measurement things in place. So typically, I'd say most of our customers are using some web analytics data. Most of the time it's Google Analytics. Maybe it's Adobe. Maybe it's some other type of analytics. But making sure that you're confident that that's kind of the one source of truth. And socialize that as well. I think we saw in the roster, there's obviously some analytics people in this room. Be sure to share all of that. Usually what we see a lot is those analytics are in silos within the organization. So if you really want to reach all of the major business objectives, people are keeping analytics for this business objective in one place and this one in another place. So it's really good and important to socialize it so that your end-to-end social strategy is very concise, it's very clear, and there's clear measurement analytics framework behind it to prove all of that. And then for earlier I was talking about understanding a rebrand goal. So again, this is kind of highlighting that the metrics could be vague. So understanding, in this case, be specific which engagement metrics matter for understanding a rebrand of a company. Is an engagement a comment? Is an engagement people talking about your brand in a different area, not on your own channels? Or is an engagement tied to, tied to when someone actually looks at social media content and asks you a direct message or sends you a DM or something like that? It can all kind of be in different layers of that social marcom funnel, but putting them all together could help you define an engagement. And so that's actually it. Hootsuite is certainly one of many partners that can help you define and measure these goals. But what we're trying to do is move organizations that are just kind of dabbling in social media from one use case to another to actually making it embedded within an organization so that at the bottom line business objectives of what you're doing, not just in the marketing function, but in the sales, recruitment, any other business use case, customer service, whatever it might be, that we're driving towards defining those goals, being able to measure it by putting the correct measuring tools in place, and then ultimately proving it. So you're making sure that you are achieving an increased business objective in all of those different areas that we talked about. So that's actually it. I'll open up for Q&A. I'm going to step back a bit. Any questions, at least in terms of maybe your personal companies, or any questions in terms of some of the content that was just presented there? Oh, here we go. Are there any platforms that you feel are overlooked by companies at the moment? I'm guessing you mean social media platforms. That's a good question. So I guess the main one I'm seeing more and more, which is kind of crazy because I'm at the age when YouTube came out, that now more companies and brands are going back to YouTube, and all of a sudden that's more sticky and more cool. But people are not necessarily measuring YouTube in the right ways. So I think although companies are going back to that channel and platform, they may not be measuring it in the right way holistically. Like they're keeping that very separate. Video and YouTube is its own beast, and it doesn't really correlate with Facebook, Twitter, and so forth, or even any kind of direct marketing or other methods that you are doing. So I think YouTube is probably, people are going to that one, but they're just not measuring it in the best way possible. Obviously, certain social networks allow us to capture data from third parties. So like LinkedIn, for example, is a pretty cagey one. They only give you really good data if you're paying for content to be on there. But that is, there's other ways in which you can measure things on LinkedIn. So when you're talking about, let's say, a talent brand on LinkedIn, and you're putting out content as a corporation, that talent brand, yeah, you're getting likes, impressions, comments, and stuff on the posts that you're putting out on your page. But you can also look at some metrics of when people are approaching your LinkedIn page as an organization, where else are they looking at? And you always see on that sidebar, and it says, people that looked at Hootsuite also look at these companies. So you take that into consideration of, okay, so yes, they're engaging with my content, but now how does that translate when they're going off from my company to another company? How are they engaging with that content? Is it like a similar type of uptick in likes, comments, shares, and that sort of thing? Is there a way to measure Insta Story content yet? They're not. I don't know yet. So with Hootsuite's tools, there is a few ways to measure very, very high-level metrics. It's simple as views, and it's simple repeat views, and then also, actually, I think that's it. But there might be third-party tools that I don't know about that are measuring Insta stories. How do you prove ROI on social? So based on what I just presented, all of those measurements are in place. There are tools out there. So for example, when we plug in, let's say we're going back to that financial services example. You're putting out content, and that content is driving to a landing page where someone downloads a white paper, right? That's seeing content, clicking it with intent, and then making that conversion, downloading it. What we do is we can amend a specific link that goes out associated with that content. And that link could be associated with a paid targeted strategy, or it could be organic, doesn't matter. But we're following that link path back to that actual conversion to the website. And that conversion of that white paper download could be worth 10 pence to us, £1, whatever it might be. But since we're tracking every single time that happens, we can then combine that with, that might happen 50 times, so then that's worth £50 to us. Or that's combined with our direct marketing efforts through email, through direct actual physical mail or whatever it might be. And we have a calculation that's made through all of those efforts and put into one tool. So since we have those web analytics plugged in, yes, we can measure all of those metrics, prove an ROI, but then how does that combine with the overall other channels that you're putting that content out to? And so we do certainly have tools that support that, putting them all into one place. The good thing is it's a cross-channel, so it's across all the social media channels that you'd want, and then also can take in other sources that you can put in as kind of like hardline costs, so to speak. So what goals does Insta support best? What can you expect to achieve there? So actually a lot. So I was just talking to not Ian, but my other colleague earlier. I'm actually making purchases on Instagram from clicking through content that's sponsored to me. Also, if you're following a brand, I follow a lot of sports teams, that sort of thing. I'm engaging multiple times to similar brands, and I'm also commenting. And I'm usually not commenting my own personal thoughts. I'm basically CCing someone. I'm mentioning someone on that post. So that a brand could say that that's in kind of an earned view, right? That's usually not a follower to that brand. Maybe they are, but they can look at something like that. So how many times am I being mentioned by someone that's not a follower to my company on Instagram? That could be something that you could look at and make as a KPI metric. I don't know how to get slides from this presentation, but I'm sure the MC will let you know that. If you're immature in social strategy, how should you benchmark if you also don't have any direct competitors? Good question. So what you can do is, if you are putting out at least some social content, you can at least go back from the start. If you absolutely are just starting, you're always going to have success, but at least that's a good starting point to improve the next time. So start with a campaign, make sure that you record everything that happens with that campaign, and then just wait until the next one, and then benchmark against that. There are anonymized data sources that you can certainly get. So if you go on the Hootsuite website, if you go on a lot of other, let's say agency white papers, that sort of thing, digital agencies, they'll give you certain brands in certain industries and how they perform based on a specific campaign. So maybe you want to look at that in terms of a competitor. Would Hootsuite support internal communication effectiveness measurement? Yammer newsletters, yes, absolutely. So we have employee advocacy tools, internal communication tools that we use, and we certainly do. We look at, we use Facebook at work or workplace as our internal communications tool, and we do look at the top performing content in various groups. I'm in a very product focused area, so in the product groups that we look at, they actually do look to see who looks at the roadmap, who's sharing the roadmap, and when they share it, what teams are they sharing it with? Who is actually kind of an evangelist internally? And luckily Facebook does provide a lot of data points like that. Yammer, I'm not too familiar with what kind of data points that they use. But there's also employee advocacy tools, such as, Hootsuite has one, LinkedIn has one. And for an example, every employee at Hootsuite was given content to share about this presentation. And we're able to look and see who shared that content out on their own personal LinkedIn and who had the most impressions and likes and comments on that piece of content. So we are actively looking at that. How can we weed out fake followership or poor quality leads from social to avoid muddling your metrics? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But I will, if someone else in the room has the answer to that, that'd be great if they wanted to chime in. But we can go back to that later. Maybe when I share the deck, I'll follow up. There's certainly some people at Hootsuite that's probably had experience with that. I know Twitter and obviously Facebook are kind of doing their best job of getting rid of some of these fake accounts and spam accounts. But in terms of likes that have an egg or a retweet that has just like an egg profile pic, you still have to consider that as a realistic action. But maybe you don't care about those vanity metrics, so you only want to look at real people that are communicating with you on a one-to-one basis. So actually sending you a DM with meaningful context behind it. Maybe that's where you start your measurement with. Okay, I think I answered that one already. Do you see augmented reality playing a major role in social strategies in any particular platform? Yes. So if you listen to our CEO in any of the recent roundtables and talks that he's been giving, he's very big on chatbots. Now, granted, we haven't moved into that area by any means as an organization ourselves, but we do see a lot of banks that I work with, a lot of a lot of retail brands, CPG brands that are using bots and automation in terms of talking back to people. The good thing with that is obviously it saves a company resources and time. The quality might not be there yet. That's up to that brand to decide. But if a bot is answering a quick piece of information, it's also able to funnel that information back to an internal system like a CRM tool. So then they can go back and then be part of that customer journey a bit quicker and a bit faster. So we do see chatbots becoming more and more used. Okay, does the social industry need to invest in a uniform measurement or a ratings approach to bring more transparency to social investment? How TV uses groups. Okay, so in a way they're kind of already doing that, right? So I hope I'm answering this question correctly. For example, if you're building audiences on any social channel, you can build audiences directly on Facebook, for an example, in terms of targeting and so forth. So they're already putting people in a bucket based on demographics, age, and then in terms of a rating system, once you take that bucket and you push content to them, and maybe that content is a lead form or a way in which you can get some information from that user as long as they opt in. Then internally, you rate them, right? You put them back into a campaign tool, like let's say Adobe Campaign or something like that. And that campaign tool changes that lead score of that user or changes the score of the person that you want to touch in more areas on that customer journey. Okay. How do you leverage your social strategy among seniors who may be less tech savvy and measure this? Okay, I love this question. So literally that's my entire job. That's what we do all the time. When we're talking about social strategy, it usually does still stay in the basement because it is new and it's decision makers within corporations are typically not as tech savvy, like you mentioned here. But when we correlate how social media impacts those top line business objectives, then they start to listen because that's all they care about. They need to achieve those top 5 goals for the year or their 5-year plan, and that's all. However it impacts that, it doesn't matter as long as it does impact it. So if you can make a clear definition of how that social media funnel impacts that, and then talk to them about how, more than ever now, we actually have the metrics to back this up. It's always funny. There's another presentation that we do that talks about how many minutes a day and hours a day people are on Facebook and social media sites, which I think is this is for the Canadian government, which is the use case randomly. I think it was about an hour and a half of people are on social media channels a day. That was the addressable market that the Canadian government was trying to get at. But they were spending $10+ million Canadian dollars on a campaign that didn't touch social media, that wanted to attract this market that's spending an hour and a half on social media. And they spent, I think, 500,000 Canadian dollars on direct ads on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and where those people are actually spending time. For that $10 million, they have no actual feedback. They don't know if that worked because it's just display ads, it's ads in a paper, it's news, it's print. But on social media, you actually know that it's working. There's measurement tools. It's actually there. So it doesn't make any sense that they would invest that much money on something that they're just going blind versus something they actually track. So that's kind of the conversation you need to have with those senior leaders and execs, because it's just kind of a paradigm shift that they need to encounter. not to say that they need to give up on everything that they've done traditionally, but this is becoming more and more important because this is where people are spending more time and also where you're actually getting realistic measurement results. Okay, how do you see social media campaigns evolving over the next 5 years? That's a good question. Obviously, there'll be new channels coming up more and more, but I think what you're seeing is channels are getting much more specific. So the big ones are probably like Facebook. That's obviously going to be there. But when you think about brands on Facebook when they first started, it was just major brands, and they were using it just as putting out pieces of content. But now brands are doing very specific things on Facebook in terms of Facebook video, in terms of being able to do full end-to-end customer service on Facebook, things like that. Being able to buy stuff, being able to book hotels and things like that on Facebook. But since there's going to be more and more niche social media channels, I'd say, in fact, I pretty much only use Instagram now, and I only use it for buying things, looking at brands that I'm already affiliated with, but I also use it for discovery. So if instead of looking at, let's say an example for a hotel I'm going to stay at, instead of looking at TripAdvisor, I do like a location-based search on Instagram, and I want to see what actual people are doing there. Like, what are people actually eating? What are people actually like wearing or whatever? What's the actual scene like? And so there's different ways in which people are using social media for discovery. And as people are finding out those new use cases, there'll be a niche social media channel that'll pop up here or there. We also work in higher ed quite a bit. And so campus takeovers are really huge there. So basically giving a student access to that university's Snapchat or Instagram for a day is happening more and more and more, and that's proving hugely popular. Okay. What is the biggest mistake you see brands making when measuring video campaigns? Oh, yeah, so video views. Counting a 3-second video view as a video view, I don't think that's realistic at all, because that's just someone scrolled through and didn't really look at it. In fact, they didn't want to look at it, so it's actually, I'd say, an anti-unit of measurement. Measuring video campaigns, sometimes videos are too long, so I know that, let's say this car brand I was talking about earlier, they spent a lot of money to make a very long video, but no one really wanted to watch a really long video. So making sure that it's at the right length of time for the social network that it is. Maybe on a landing page you do the full version, full edit. Okay, do you recommend companies to have different social media for each country? Got it. Would you recommend strategy per country? We see this a lot, especially with CPG, let's say. You obviously have different brands in different companies. They might have different names, but they're actually the same thing. It just depends if you want to open the floodgates, especially if you're going to communicate one-to-one and have engagement on those channels. You definitely need to be staffed up enough and have a tool. Let's say you have a global company that's based in the UK, and you want to distribute content to different markets within Europe in different languages, different content ideas, and so forth. So you need a mechanism to make that easy, first of all, to share that content and distribute it to those different local markets. But you also need to have the staff there that can translate it, that can make sure that they're putting it out at the right time, or that they have enough staff to engage when people do ask you a question or send you messages with that. So I don't think there's one necessarily like out-of-the-box strategy of what you should do, but to have different country localized pages, it's a huge beast. But the good news about doing that is then you get even more meaningful insights with that. So instead of capturing all of the metrics that come into your global page, now you can get very precise metrics from each country, say Facebook page that you're creating, or country Twitter page that you're doing, and then you can be much more precise about targeting those people and making relevant content for those audiences. How can a social strategy benefit from the customer service input? Yeah, so what we do in a lot of companies that, let's say, that do use Hootsuite is when someone asks us a question, because we use it for customer service, we take that question, and sometimes it's a complaint, sometimes it's I wish you guys did this, or this feature is better with this other company, or whatever it might be. We actually do tag all of that content. And we can do that in an automated way through an algorithm that just automatically tags content related to an idea or an improvement or a product. And then we take that back into our product roadmap, and we make enhancements based on, 30 people didn't really like where this button is. So we tagged that up, and then that goes into a feedback loop internally in our systems. So in terms of improving your content strategy, we also saw a car insurance brand. So they're kind of putting out like these fluffy piece of content, things that weren't related to car insurance, but it was just things, like de-icing your car, or like, making sure you get tires every now and then. And so they're putting out this content, but their customers were starting to ask, like, I see this content, but I really need to answer the question about my car insurance. Like, where do I go? And so now they've adapted their content strategy to at least have a little button that says, if you need information, are you a current customer, click here. And it sends them to like a FAQ answers question. Okay. Any questions from the audience? Anyone want to ask anything as I keep reading these? Okay, cool. Do you I know these are audience questions, but do you consider cannibalization with other marketing, especially free ones, organic, direct? If yes, how? If not, why not? Other marketing. I'm gonna have to pass on that question. I don't have a good answer for whoever asked that. I won't give you the best answer, so I'm sorry about that. I'll try to follow up. If Ian, you don't mind noting that one down. Thanks. Okay, my question is on software. What would be your top asset management system or campaign management system that you would recommend for SMEs? I also can't answer that question in this panel. There are several out there, though, of course, and then you can look at different companies that do all that research and then publish their findings. So Forrester or Gartner, or you can look at a McKinsey study, something like that, and they will kind of give top 5, top 10, that sort of thing. But I certainly can't answer that question. Is there an ideal number of times your brand should be seen by a consumer to drive action? No, there's no ideal number of times. Obviously, people that are seeing more and more content, especially across channels, they're getting more information by the time they actually make an intent or make a conversion. So they're probably a better customer that you'd want to have. But someone could just see something once and immediately just click on it and buy it, or make that conversion. So there's no ideal number of times, but what you can do as you go through some of the metrics that we offer is find out how many times is kind of that sweet spot that you're getting till someone does make a conversion. It could be 2, it could be 5, it could be still an unknown, but then you're making a guess. And once you're getting an average rate, then you can start putting out content to different places in a more timely fashion. All right, 2 more. Do you think social companies should open the door to third-party tracking to allow consistent measurement across all digital, allowing transparency? Absolutely. Obviously biased with that, but 100%. So a lot of times where if you are a pretty complex organization, you probably do have a digital agency that is doing an ad buy for you or an ad spend. And there's a huge lack of transparency there. You might be spending X million of dollars with this agency, but their actual amount that they're paying for a Facebook ad campaign is an unknown to the brand. They don't necessarily tell you. What we'd like to do is provide transparency and making sure that the brand is putting that money really where it's going to matter. So the ad campaign is certainly something you should spend money on, but if there's some costs that are going unused or not used in the right way and there's no transparency, you're never going to know and you're never going to improve. So we do bring in different metrics specifically from what an ad spend is, whether it is happening from an agency or a brand or maybe some localized country that has a smaller ad spend. We're taking and uncovering all of that detail and putting it into one place so that you combine it with all of the other channels and actions and metrics that you are recording. So yes, absolutely, I think that's very important. Final question: Do you have to use Hootsuite Enterprise for your consulting in putting together objectives, goals, and KPIs, or do you offer that in your lower tiers also? No, you don't have to use Hootsuite Enterprise at all necessarily to do that. You would have to use some third-party software, though, of course, to be able to track links and so forth. So Google Analytics, that's free. That's I think everyone should be able to use that one to be able to track those against some business goals. Now, pulling that all together in one place, Hootsuite does a great job of that. So and obviously other tools as well, because it is very taxing. If you're having a Facebook strategy and you want to look at all the link clicks and tying that back into business objectives, then you got to do it for organic and paid. Then you got to do it again for Twitter, and you got to do it again for LinkedIn. And doing that all separately is usually a couple days in Excel, and then having to do that. Granted, that's great if that's what you do for a living and that you need to justify your job, but there's easier ways to do it than that. Okay, any real life questions? Huh? Cool. I appreciate your time, and we'll figure out how to send this material over to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions in there if you guys are shy. Thanks.